Greetings, stranger. Stop what you're doing, sit down and relax, because it's time for another competitive Warhammer Fantasy Battle report. So today it's Warriors of Chaos versus Bretonnians at 2,500 points. Now my opponent for today is Drew Chant, who is going to be playing the Bretonnians, and Drew has quite an interesting re-entry story when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy, having played it literally decades ago at school and not having played until he resumed with Bretonnians around 1 year ago. I told him he was being a masochist to try playing Bretonnians as his first Warhammer Fantasy army, but he wouldn't have any of it. Being a Francophile and a fan of Arthurian chivalry, Bretonnians were going to be the army for him. Right, so let's have a look at the warriors first, who I'm going to be leading. So, first and foremost, Gorach, the Dragon of Cheese, with his double breath weapons and his nasty level 4 on the Law of Tzeentch. Then for heroes, we've got Ariadne the Spider, in other words, Skylar the Chaos Spawn, who is going to be my general for today with her leadership of 10. And then finally, Throg the Troll King, a legendary and rather cheesy special character in 8th edition, who amongst many other nasty things, lets you count Chaos Trolls as core. Once again, there's no battle standard bearer in this army, and yes, astute viewers will notice I've learned nothing since last time. Right, on to core, we've got 11 Chaos Trolls, Throg's Chaos Trolls no less, with additional hand weapons for a massively powerful central unit which the Bretonnian Knights are going to have all sorts of trouble with because they've got a vomit attack which ignores armour. Behind them we've got 5 Chaos Hounds whose job it is to get in the way. Then we've got 20 Marauders with the Mark of Slaanesh, flails and a banner. They're there just to capture some objectives, and I decided to make the unit 20 strong and give them flails to give them a little bit of a chance in combat. Then we've got the Chaos Chariot with no Mark of Chaos. Mr. Old Reliable are turning again, and this time he's brought a friend, which is a second Chaos Chariot with no Mark of Chaos, which is represented by that Plague car, which is a very antiquated but very enviable 3rd edition model. Then for special, we've got 5 jet-propelled pieces of chaff in those Hellstriders of Slaanesh there on the left. And then we've got the Chimera with his obligatory regen and flaming breath. 2 rare choices, the first being 3 Skullcrushers of Khorne with a standard bearer and the Gleaming Pennant to allow them to reroll 1 leadership test, which is useful in the absence of a BSB. And then finally there's a Giant there with the Mark of Nurgle. Not a very often selected piece because it's not very good. I did initially select a Great Spine Chaos Beast from the Storm of Magic supplement in this army, but when I found that Drew's comp score was a bit higher than mine, I swapped it out for a Giant. Right, looking across the table to the Bretonnians, Drew has 3 units of Knights Errant making up his core. He's got 10 Archers with Braziers. He's got 2 Trebuchets. He's got 2 units of 3 Pegasus Knights. He's got a Grail Reliquary with 6 Battle Pilgrims pushing it, deployed in a darts note. Very sneaky. And then an absolute logjam of characters. First, there's a Bretonnian Lord on a horse who suspiciously doesn't seem to have a lance. In other words, code for he's probably got Heroic Killing Blow. We've then got the Green Knight, interested to see how Drew uses him. And then a level 4 Prophetess on the Law of Beasts. For heroes, there's a Paladin Battle Standard Bearer, a regular Paladin, a Pegadin, in other words a Paladin riding a Royal Pegasus, and then finally Lady Almathea, who is a level 2 Damsel on the Law of Beasts, who is going to be deployed in the Grail Reliquary. Now, astute viewers may notice that many of these Bretonnians are actually my Bretonnians. Now, Drew does have a Bretonnian army, but because he was coming over to mine to play this game, he decided to pack light, and so just brought the Grail Reliquary and some Pegasus Knights to complete the army that he wanted to field. Under the Cardiff Crusade Comp system, this army works out as a not very generous +1, so according to that, around average on the competitiveness scale. Right, onto magic spells. Gorach draws Blue Fire of Tzeentch, which is a little magic missile, Bolt of Change, which is a bolt thrower-like magic missile, which I've come to rather appreciate as watchers of recent battle reports might infer. We've then got Glean Magic, which is an excellent spell, only an 18-inch range, but it enables you to steal magic from opposition wizards. And then finally the big number 6, Infernal Gateway, 2d6 strength and 2d6 hits. Not a bad hand at all. Over to the Bretonnians, and Drew's of course running 2 Beasts Wizards, which is something that I've never done before as Bretonnians, so I'm interested to see how he'll go. His Prophetess gets Wissen's Wild Form, an excellent buff spell, the Amber Spear, which is an even better version of the Bolt of Change, Pan's Impenetrable Pelt, which is a toughness buff for characters, and then the Savage Beast of Horos, which is a strength and attack buff also for characters. Lady Althemir, the level 2 damsel, has Wissen's Wild Form and the Transformation of Cadon. Now, this is really actually something that Drew planned for. By picking the spells with his level 4 first, he could almost guarantee it that his level 2 would get the transformation. And so we'll have to see what effect that has in the game, because it's generally speaking not a very competitive spell, although of course when it goes off you can put a devastating monster on the table. Oh yes, and if you like my battle reports, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. It would be wonderful if I could get to 1,000 subscribers. Right, let's get into the game, and this one's something of a landmark for me, because it's the first game of 8th edition that I've staged in my new loft conversion. First important thing to say is that we're playing a scenario in this game, which is to capture pieces of terrain that are outside our deployment zone. I nominate that forest there on the right hand side of the board, whereas Drew nominates the hill in the centre of my deployment zone. Obviously it's also in my interest to defend that, and ditto Drew defending the forest. So let's have a look at the deployment, and the Bretonnians are clustered mainly in the centre. I think Drew's going to use that building to cover the side of his lance formations. I think this is generally a really good idea when you're setting up as Bretonnians, to try and cover your vulnerable flanks with impassable pieces of terrain, and also to make it so that your opponents struggle to flank you. He's got 2 trebuchets on both sides of the board, and the Pegadin and the Pegasus Knights there behind the hill. The only thing that Drew doesn't do in his deployment, and I think this is purely strategic to allow him to concentrate his forces in the centre, is he doesn't really defend that forest over there on the right hand side. So I'm able to place my Marauders on the right hand flank with a reasonable chance of going into it. However, there's still the Green Knight, and there are quite a lot of flying Pegasus moving pieces, so I don't think it's by any means a foregone conclusion that the Marauders can walk into that objective that easily. Onto the Chaos deployment, I've deployed I think a lot more conventionally. I've just literally gone and deployed in a line. I've got Gorach there in the centre, my Trolls in the centre, which is where I really want them because I think that they can take some of these Knight charges. The Hellstriders there on the left hand side, where they should have a fairly easy time destroying that Trebuchet, and also some other fast stuff there between the 2 buildings. I feel fairly happy about this deployment. I feel happy about the position of the Marauders on the right hand side, and I think I've got a lot of good stuff to defend the hill in the centre. Now of course it's always very easy to out-deploy Bretonnians if you're thinking, because Bretonnians almost all the time are going to go second because they're not going to forsake their Blessing of the Lady. That means, especially if you've got fast things, you can really think about where the game is going to be starting on your turn 2, because you're going to be pushing up everything in turn 1 with the certainty that you're going to go first. This is such a huge disadvantage for the Bretonnians, and sometimes I don't think opposition really make enough hay out of it. So that's indeed what happens, and the Bretonnians get off their horses and pray to the lady for this nasty encounter against the Chaos Gods. So, on Chaos turn 1, I push up aggressively. My Hellstriders vanguarded forwards the full 12 inches, knowing that they would be able to move again in my turn 1, and you can see they've already got right up to the Trebuchet, literally within spitting distance of it, and are going to be charging that off in my next turn. My other advances are also quite bold, so I move the Skullcrushers up aggressively with the building on the right hand side. The main charge threat there is from those Red Knights errant, and I think the Skullcrushers can take that charge. Likewise, I push the Chimera up fairly aggressively as well, and he can be charged by the Pegasus Knights. Likewise, I think the Chimera, given he's got a flaming breath weapon, can take that Pegasus Knight charge. My giant lumbers up, using the building as cover to stop him being charged by those lances, and my dogs also push forwards, although they can of course be seen. The rest of my army on the right also advances. After I finish my deployment zone, I feel I may have been a little bit rash in two respects. The first is the Chimera and those Pegasus Knights. After I recalculate that in my mind, I actually think this could be a really close fight. As for those dogs there in the centre, I also realise that I'm going to have to flee with those if one of those knights charge it, because if I allow the knights to connect, they'll be overrunning into my giant. I also think that the knight unit on the right hand side of the tower can actually just about see my giant, and I'll have to flee with both of those units if the knights choose to charge me, although I'm not too worried because they'll be fleeing in the path of my General Ariadne, who you can see there lurking behind the hill. I did fiddle about a bit, but there was no way I could evade both of the trebuchets with my dragon, and so they'll both be shooting at him, I would imagine, come Bretonnian turn 1. Onto the magic phase, and I immediately roll a double 1, which wasn't what I wanted to see. Goloroch throws this Spartan offering from the Winds of Magic at a 2 dice Glean Magic on the level 2 damsel. Drew thinks about this long and hard because I roll a 7 on the dice, which means he can't actually dispel it. After some thinking, Drew elects to use his Dispel Magic scroll to protect his level 2 damsel. Not a bad outcome as far as I'm concerned. Not bad to draw out the Bretonnian Dispel scroll with only a 2 dice magic phase. I'm happy enough to take that. Right, on to Bretonnian turn 1, and Drew certainly doesn't hold back. The Knights Errant in red and the Grail Reliquary both charge the Skull Crushers. Now, I was half expecting the Knights Errant to do that, or be forced to do that with their impetuous roll, but I wasn't expecting the Grail Reliquary to go in there. I think that I'll be able to do quite a lot of damage against the Grail Reliquary, and that's going to stack up combat resolution in my favour. But I've never faced it before, so we'll see how it goes. The other charge that Drew does, which I think is a quite good percentage charge on balance, is to take the charge I've left him into the Chimera with those 3 Pegasus Knights. That's going to be touch and go, because even if the Chimera loses combat by 1, he's probably going to be out of here. In the centre, one of the Knight units charges the Chaos Hounds and I elect to flee. In the movement phase, the Green Knight materialises from the wood on the left-hand side of the field and comes to look at the side of the Chimera, thinking he might be able to lend his hand there if that combat continues. On the right-hand side, the flying circus of the 3 Pegasus Knights and the Pegadin both shuffle slightly and face the wood to counter the block of marauders coming to it from my deployment zone. The magic phase is 7 dice to 5, and I realise it's the transformation spell that I'm really going to have to stop. That's the reason why I drew charge the Grail Reliquary into those juggernauts. If he can get transformation off, and Lady Almathea turns into a mountain chimera or a great fire dragon or something of that nature, then those juggernauts might well be in trouble. Anyway, Drew uses his first 3 dice on an amber spear into the oncoming Chaos Chariot, and I decide to leave my dice to dispel what's coming next and let the chariot take the bolt. Unfortunately for the Bretonnians, the gleaming orange hunting trident bounces off the chariot's woodwork and fails to damage it. Then, with 4 dice remaining, Lady Almathea channels the powers of woodland spirits and transforms herself into a black hydra, getting the transformation off on a double 6. That swung that combat quite decisively in the Bretonnians' favour, I think, but I still don't think it's over yet because those juggernauts have got a 1-up save, and that's worth its weight in gold. Now, onto the shooting phase, and this is the turn of course I'm worried about because I'm facing 2 trebuchets. But first, let's not forget about those peasant bowmen with their braziers on the hill. They fire at the trolls and do well to manage a wound, stripping the trolls regen. Drew then sizes up the targets for his trebuchets. Goloroch is visible and he can throw 2 rocks at him if he wants to, but in the end he's worried about scattering and hurting his own troops, and he likes the idea of going for the trolls because they've already lost their regen. Both trebuchets managed to hit the trolls, one directly and one partially, and managed to destroy 3 of them with 2 wounds to another troll. I must admit I didn't mind Drew targeting the trolls with the trebuchet, but in the end he did actually stack up some quite significant damage, so maybe it wasn't a bad move after all. Right, it's on to the combat phase, and both of these fights are going to be very dicey. Turning first to the Pegasi into the Chimera. The knights swing at the beast but fail their fear test, and unfortunately get no damage through whatsoever, either the knight or the Pegasi. The Chimera's Flaming Breath scores only 4 hits and also doesn't damage the knights, but the creature's attacks push one of the riders from its saddle, with the Pegasus Knights ending up losing combat by 1 and holding. On to the Juggernaut combat, and both sides fight like absolute lemons. The Bretonnians, even with their transformed monster, just doing a single wound to the Skull Crushers. But for their part, the Crushers can't do any damage even to the Grail Reliquary, with all of the Battle Pilgrims passing their ward saves. One of them does manage to ping off a knight, but as it stands, the Crushers have comfortably lost by 3. They roll a dice on a 5 and fail it, but then the Gleaming Pennant comes to their rescue and they manage to pass it on the second attempt. So, the Chaos have managed to hold against both of these very challenging Bretonnian charges. I regret to say that I think those Bretonnians are going to be in big trouble come Chaos turn 2, because all of the knights now have their charges blown and they'll be just down to strength 3 hand weapons. So, on to Chaos turn 2, and I have 2 charges of my own, which are both of those chariots. The green chariot tries a longish bomb charge on the peasant bowman on the hill, but it fails it, and then the plague cart tries one against the Pegasi. He's going to have to crash through a wood to get to it, but it's a bit too tempting, because if I can break those Pegasus Knights, I'll be able to overrun into the Pegadin behind them. The Plague Chariot come Chaos Chariot crashes through the forest, powering through any potential danger of dangerous terrain as rabbits scuttle into their burrows, and bursts out the other side into the Pegasus Knights. Finally, and it was almost so predictable that I forgot to mention it, the Hellstriders right next to the Trebuchet on the left charge into it. In my movement phase, Golruch takes to the sky and positions himself behind those 2 Bretonnian lances, ready to unleash the breath of cheese and destroy about half the knight unit. Bretonnians are very vulnerable to this, of course, because with such narrow frontages, it's very easy for flyers to just park themselves behind or to the side of these lances, and there's not a great deal Bretonnian players can do about this. The only ray of light for the Bretonnians, seemingly, is that the trolls fail their stupidity test on a 10 and stumble forward 6 inches. They've put themselves in a bit of an awkward place now, and so I decide to run over with the giant to place him in front of the 2 knight units to cover me in case one of them decides to charge. Right, moving into the magic phase, and Tzeentch rewards me with 11 power dice to Drew's 6. For his first trick, Golruch tries another Glean Magic on the Prophetess, and this time Drew decides to let it go. In the Great Mental Duel, the Dragon of Chaos proves the stronger and plucks Wisson's wild form from the mind of the Prophetess and knocks her down a wizard level. Thrilled with his new toy, Golruch immediately then casts Wisson's wild form on the Skull Crushers to allow them to stand up in that difficult combat. Even with their depleted resources though, the Bretonnians do manage to dispel this. Next there's a Bolt of Change, which Drew lets go. Slight mistake from me there because of course the knight unit that I'm targeting actually has a 3-up ward save because it's got magic res 2 by dint of the Prophetess being there. Suffice to say the bolt does no damage. I've then got 4 dice left and a little bit of a quandary. Do I decide to use them to cast an Infernal Gateway to bring Wrath and Ruin to one of those knight units, not the one with the Prophetess in this time, or do I use them to dispel the transformation, which is also going to help the Skull Crushers? Golruch follows his aggressive wrecking instincts and goes for the gateway and gets it with a double 6. It does only 5 strength 4 hits to the knights and they lose none of their number. Then it's time for the miscast, and it's another dimensional cascade, which Golruch specialises in almost as much as the wretched demon does. So the big strength 10 hit wounds Golruch. It then bounces off the 2 knights that it hits with me rolling double ones. And then the big dice comes up and Golruch is sucked into the warp again for the second time in 3 games. This is obviously an absolutely massive moment, not just because I've lost a 500-point dragon and my wizard, but because he was about to unleash the breath of cheese on that knight unit and Drew would have been taking 10 toughness tests and would have lost half that unit. I have to say, in 8th edition, I don't mind it when you lose your wizard when you 6 dice or even 5 dice spells, but in this case I only 4 diced gateway and my wizard still died. Still, in the grand scheme of things, that changing of ways might have a positive effect on the game, because I think the Chaos are still in an excellent position at going to kick some Bretonnian butt come the hand-to-hand combat phase. So, there are 4 fights, and I feel excellent about all 4 of them. The first one's the Hellstriders versus the Trebuchet, with the Riders of Slaanesh predictably slaughtering the peasants guarding the war machine. Next, it's on to the Chimera, and this time the 2 remaining Pegasus Knights pass their fear test. Despite needing 6s to wound, the Riders manage to get a wound through on the Chimera, which fails its armor save and its regen. Then for its part, the Chimera lashes out with its oversized number of attacks, but connects only with thin air. The beast loses combat by 1, fails its break test and is run down by the 2 remaining Pegasus Knights. That wasn't what I expected. Right, okay then, hoping for some better news from the Skull Crushers. Again, we really don't roll well. We managed to kill just 2 of the Battle Pilgrims, with them again passing an absolute tidal wave of ward saves. The Knight who's there holding the 2nd rank of that Knight Errant unit has to take 2 ward saves on 5+ against the Juggernauts themselves, and he makes both of them. For their part, the combined Bretonnians do enough to finish off the last remaining Skullcrusher, doing 2 wounds on it. I lose by virtue of the Grail Reliquae's Musician, test on a 7 and break. The standard dies and the 1 remaining rider is left fleeing, being hotly pursued by the Knights Errant just an inch behind it. Because that happened in my turn, those Knights Errant are simply going to chase the Juggernaut off the board in Drew's next turn. Feeling pretty exasperated, we turn then to the final combat, and surely Tzeentch can't punish me any more than he already has. Well, the chariot crashes into the Pegasus Knights and destroys one of them with its scythe, but the Pegasus Knights manage to stick on a 5, so there's no overrun for me. Right, let's get that into perspective. So, my wizard double 6'd a spell on 4 dice and did no damage with it whatsoever, then blew himself up. Then I had 3 combats all massively stacked in my favour and managed to screw up all 3 of them. That's probably one of the worst turns I've ever had in any game of Warhammer Fantasy from a competitive standpoint. Right, on to Bretonnian turn 2, and Divine Intervention from either Tzeentch or the Lady of the Lake has placed Le Bretonnie in a prime position. The first charge is the Knight unit with all the characters into the side of the giant. The second are those knights that broke the Skull Crushers into the remaining rider, which easily manages to chase it down and kill it, placing the knights in a very strong position to challenge for that hill in the middle of my deployment zone and thus secure the objective. Finally, the Grail Reliquae was able to reform last turn and face the Hellstriders, and Lady Alphamea, still in the guise of a War Hydra, crashes into the Hellstriders. The magic phase sees the Savage Beast of Horos cast on the Bretonnian general, who's going to be looking to do some serious damage against that giant. For my part, I throw my 5 Dispel dice against that transformation spell and manage to turn Lady Alphamea back into a mere damsel. That's certainly going to wipe the smile off her face there. The combat phase sees me score a few important blows back. The charioteers on the Plague Cart chariot decapitate one of the Pegasus Knights and break the other one off the table. Of course, there's no Pegadin there now for them to overrun into, so they just turn round. Understandably enough, the fight between Lady Althemea, with now just being a damsel, and the 5 Hellstriders does not go in the Bretonnians' favour, with the riders hacking her down. The Hellstriders reform into a dart formation ready for a charge on the Grail Reliquary in my next turn. Those Hellstriders have also unlocked Devastating Charge for destroying a unit in combat, so I'm optimistic we can do well against those pilgrims. Finally, there's the combat with the Giant, and this is rather an odd one. The Knights Errant themselves are immune to psychology on the charge, but that doesn't stop the General and 2 Paladins both failing their fear tests on a 9 rerollable, and the young knights are appalled as the prime aristocracy of Bretonnia screams its head off in terror in the front rank. Despite his inebriation by fear, the Bretonnian Lord has still got 8 attacks, and he unfurls the Sword of Swift Slaying, and despite these palpitations, manages to score 8 hits thanks to the Savage Beast. However, he doesn't manage to show the 6 that would have heroically killing blowed the Giant, but nonetheless, the great man still takes 3 wounds. For their part, the other 2 Paladins wound the Giant twice, but they still leave him alive. And then at initiative step 3, the Giant gets to swing and rolls the jump up and down result. 2d6 strength 6 hits are sent into the Knights. 3 of them are destroyed. Then the Knights Errant bring the Giant down, but the creature totters and falls over right back on top of the Knight unit and crushes another 3 of them from the unit he's fighting and another one from the unit beside it. Worse still, one of the Paladins can't get out of the way and is also crushed by the enormous falling bulk. I was due a little bit of luck, and I've had some there, because by all rights, probably that Giant would not have expected to do any damage at all and would have been heroically killing blowed. Instead, he killed a Paladin and more than half of one of the Knight units before we went down. Right, on to Chaos turn 3, and I've managed to pull myself back into things somewhat during their Bretonnian turn. Charge-wise, the Hellstriders spur their mounts towards the Reliquary with their new Devastating Charge. That should be a relatively easy win there. Then the Marauders on the right-hand side of the board charge the Trebuchet. There's plenty of time to destroy that, turn round and then march back into the wood to try and get the objective. Throg is also mulling a charge, but he needs a 6 on the dice to get it, and in the end I decide that I can probably get something nearly as good without taking that risk. So I run Throg out of the unit and place him right in front of the Knight unit that's still relatively undamaged, ready to let them have it with the copious vomit breath weapon in the shooting phase. I'm hoping that's going to tumble so many Knights that what's left Throg can deal with himself. Meanwhile, the freshly rallied Chaos Hounds move in to chaff the Bretonnian character unit. Ariadne continues to lurk round the hill, running round it to avoid those Pegasus Knights that destroyed the Chimera, and the 2 chariots get themselves in position for what are likely to be some decisive later game charges. No magic now of course, but we do have a shooting phase, and Throg doesn't let me down. A stream of copious vomit spells a horrible end for the careers of 5 young knights, and there are only now 5 of them remaining. I think Throg might just be able to take that if they charge him next turn. Into the combat phase, and the Hellstriders skewer 3 of the battle pilgrims, but of course this thing's stubborn and it doesn't break. Finally, the Marauders easily smash apart the Trebuchet and turn round to close upon the forest. Bretonnian turn 3 sees some very important decisions here from Drew. So we've got a very delicate situation here at the front. We've got this Bretonnian character unit with the dogs in front of them, which are preventing them wheeling into the trolls. We've then got the 5-strong Knight Errant unit with Throg parked squarely in front of it. So what Drew decides to do is to solo the Lord out into the troll unit. Then the Pegadin crashes into their rear and the Green Knight into the side. Ideally for Drew, what would happen is that those Knights Errant destroy Throg and then career into the trolls to fight a cascading combat. I'm not quite sure how this one's going to go, but I think it could be close. In the magic phase, the spell I want to stop is the Savage Beast of Horos, but unfortunately I am not able to. With no +4 to my dispel, Drew's Prophetess easily manages to get it through. And then the combats begin. So, the Grail Reliquary, with no battle pilgrims now left, suffers a single wound from the Hellstriders, with an excellent display of armor saves and ward saves. It manages to draw combat by dint of being a standard bearer, and then wins it by one by dint of being a musician. The Hellstriders fail their leadership test and break, with the Reliquary in hot pursuit. The Riders are going to have a chance to rally though, because it's my turn next. For his part, the King of the Trolls tries a sneaky gambit that you should always use against Bretonnians if you're a single character, which is that he issues a challenge. Now, Drew has the option of either accepting with his Knight-Errant champion, which would of course mean that he loses most of his attacks against Throg, or he has to refuse, which means that the Knights-Errant will lose their blessing. He makes the right call and elects to refuse, and the Knights-Errant take their swing at Throg. The young knights do a lot of damage, inflicting 5 wounds on the king, and he manages to regenerate 2 of them, leaving just 1 left. The Chaos Gods bestow a reward upon him to give him a 6+ armor save. For his part, Throg picks up his mighty cleaver and smashes down 4 of the Knights-Errant, leaving just the champion remaining. The combat is an unlikely draw, and the young cavalier brings his mount to a skidding standstill to fight it out with Throg in the next turn. Then we turn to the big combat with the trolls, and that Pegadin has got the Worm Lance, which means he's got flaming attacks and is going to go through the trolls' regen. However, the Bretonnian Lord and the Green Knight both have higher initiative than he does, and so I'm going to be getting my regen against their attacks. First, the Green Knight picks up the Dolorous Blade and swings and does 2 wounds in the trolls. And then the Lord, complemented by his Savage Beast of Horos, attacks and once again scores the full house of 8 hits. Then Drew picks up the dice to wound and rolls 4 heroic killing blows and 3 normal wounds to boot. The whirling human guillotine emerges from a flood of gore, leaving just a single troll remaining, who is promptly impaled by the Pegadin's Worm Lance. That's a pretty impressive feat of arms there from that Bretonnian Lord. He just did 15 wounds in a single combat phase. I don't think I've seen any better than that. Still not content with this troll genocide, the big man turns round to face the back of Trog to kill the king as well. The warriors have just taken another big hit, but it's not over yet, so let's move on to turn 4. Right, one thing I've got going for me is that those 2 chariots are in an excellent position, and I throw them both into the Pegadin, with one of them hitting its side and the green chariot hitting its rear. Once I kill him, as I by all rights really should do, that green chariot will be able to career into the back of the Lord, and thus might buy Throg some time. Right, what I think we've really got to do is close in on that objective, and the Marauders turn round and move towards the forest, where they'll be able to enter it in turn 5. Also, Ariadne runs around the hill and threatens those Red Knight-Errant to try and chase them off it. Up on the peripheries, the Hellstriders rally on the edge of the battlefield and turn round to face the Grail Reliquary for round 3. Come the combat phase, the 2 chariots score 11 impact hits on the Pegadin and smash him to pieces. The green chariot then careers into the back of the Lord. This is of course a risky gambit, because there's really not much of a chance that those impact hits will kill the Lord on their own, given he's undamaged. And then you know what's going to happen first, it's going to probably be heroic killing blow time again. Throg's battle against the young Knight-Errant Cavalier is actually rather eventful, with the young knight wounding Throg and him passing the armor save that he was just given by the Chaos Gods. Then Throg picks up his cleaver and pounds the young knight 5 times into the ground. Throg is again blessed by the Chaos Gods, but it's not the blessing he or I wanted. It's the Chaos Spawn result. Now, while Throg does manage to pass his leadership test, he's gifted with stupidity. Oh, the irony. Throg, the only troll in the old world who isn't stupid, has been made stupid by the Chaos Gods. Right, on to Bretonnian turn 4, and that unit of characters slams into the side of the green chariot. I don't know what I was doing there in the previous turn with those dogs. For some reason I moved them backwards when they were doing a perfectly good job chaffing them. Elsewhere, the Reliquary charges the Hellstriders to complete that rather peripheral although intriguing tussle on the outskirts of the battlefield. Drew also decides he wants to get rid of the other chariot as well and charges the red Knights Errant into that but doesn't make his charge. Those Knights Errant are going to have to get back onto that hill in the last 2 turns of the game if the Bretonnians want the objective, and Ariadne is going to stay there and try and stop them. The Bretonnian magic phase sees both Pan's impenetrable pelt and the Savage Beast of Horos both cast on the Lord. I think we know what's going to be happening now. In the shooting phase, the Peasant Bowmen fire at the Marauders. Given I've got 20 men left here, I don't think they're going to be seriously inconveniencing me, but the bowmen put in an unbelievable volley, and despite needing 5s to hit, managed to fell 6 of the 20 Marauder horsemen, despite there only being 10 bow shots. Into the combat phase, and the Reliquary once again does no damage, and we the Hellstriders do 1 wound to it. It's a drawn combat because of its standard, and it wins by 1 because of its musician, and again the Hellstriders fail their leadership test. They run off the board, and the Reliquary emerges as the worthy winner of that little tussle. In the more important combat, we have something of a rules query, which is that the chariot obviously has charged, so it gets its impact hits. But it's also in combat with 2 different adversaries, the Lord and then the Knight unit in its side. I obviously don't want to put the impact hits onto the Lord because he's got toughness 7 due to having Pan's impenetrable pelt. Now it doesn't seem to say in the rules that you have to put the impact hits into the thing you charge. Something that charges you could also have the impact hits put into it. And so with that in mind, I allocate those hits on the Knight unit that have charged me and destroy both of the remaining Knights Errant, just leaving the Battle Standard Bearer and the Prophetess as part of that unit. If you think that was wrong rules-wise, feel free to leave a comment. Anyway, the Lord, who's been charged in the backside, whirls round with his vicious 8 attacks and his rerolls to hit and his heroic killing blow, and the chariot is beheaded 3 times and destroyed. Dismayed by the loss of its friend, as well it might be, the plague cart fails its panic test and runs towards the table edge. On to Chaos turn 5, and we're falling further behind, but I still feel we've got a good chance of getting this objective. I've not got much left, but the plague cart rallies, the Marauders back up a bit for fear of maybe being charged by the Green Knight, and Ariadne once again skulks around the hill to make sure those Red Knights Errant don't get any ideas. For his part, Throg, who is standing right in front of Mr. Heroic Killing Blow, Troll Genocide Man TM, naturally fails his stupidity test and stands there drooling at his would-be executioner. This is significant because had I passed that, Throg could have simply tried to run away and save his points. Now he's going to get charged by Mr. Heroic Killing Blow and is probably going to go the same way as all his buddies in the chariot. Bretonnian turn 5 sees the Knights Errant try a long bomb charge on the Marauders and they don't get it. The Lord charges Throg as well he might, and the Pegasus Knights charge the Chaos Hounds, who flee a very paltry distance, and they manage to get in there and destroy them all. These magic phases are getting pretty predictable, and this one's the same. Once again it's the Savage Beast of Horos on the Bretonnian Lord. For shooting, the Peasant Bowmen are actually now in short range of the Marauders and let off another devastating volley, skewering another 6 of them with their archery skills. On average, even at short range, these archers should probably kill about 2 Marauders at best, and the last 2 turns they've managed to kill 12! Still, the remaining 8 Marauders, marked as they are by Slanesh, don't panic, and I think we've still got a very good chance of surviving with enough of them to be able to claim that objective. The combat phase sees Throg the Vegetable versus the Genocide HKB Lord, and he turns Genocide into Regicide as he beheads Throg with a heroic killing blow as well. Whoa, this lord has seriously done well, and if he was on a quest for the Grail, surely he would have earned it. Right, onto the final turn of the game, turn 6, and there's very little chaos left and not much we can really do, apart from try and hold that objective. Ariadne does have a very good charge though onto the back of those red knights errant which failed their charge last time. She needs an 8 on swift stride and ballses it up. Those knights errant are going to have a long bomb charge in the marauders on Bretonnian turn 6, and if they get that, surely it's good night for the warriors. To make it as hard for those knights errant as possible, the marauders edge back as far as they can go, just keeping one model inside the forest to claim the objective. It's really going to come down to how far those knights errant can spur their mounts into a gallop. Into Bretonnian turn 6, and Drew actually opts to charge the archers into the marauders as well as the knights errant. The archers need a 10 and don't get it. So do the knights errant, and of course they've got swift stride. Drew rolls the dice and they come up a 9. The knights errant plough forwards just an inch from the marauders in the forest, who claim it for the warriors. And with that breathtaking finale comes the end of the game. I'm pretty certain the Bretonnians have got this on points, but I've managed to sneak the objective. So, let's see who's won. Right, in the final analysis, the Bretonnians ended up about 750 points ahead on VPs, which would translate to a 13-7 within a hair's breadth of a 14-6. But of course I've got the objective, and this subtracts 3 from Drew's score and adds 3 to mine, and so with that factored in, it's a 10-10 draw. I thought this was a really enjoyable game. It perhaps wasn't one for the tactical purist, but for those who like the randomness and the unpredictability of 8th edition, it was an absolute star. First there was Gorroch blowing himself up when trying to cast a 4-dice spell. And then there were those combats, the Chimera, the Skull Crushers, which really first seemed to go against the Bretonnians, then really went against the Chaos, and we lost both of them. Then there was the combat with the Giant, where despite being in all sorts of trouble, he nonetheless managed to flatten half a knight unit. And then there was that combat there with the Trolls versus the 3 characters. And that lord, by destroying 5 trolls or 15 wounds worth of monstrous infantry real estate in a single round of combat, made a very challenging combat look very, very easy. Drew also made the decision to use his knights errant, which were on the objective and the hill, to try to destroy my marauders on my objective. I think this was a completely fair call, but in the end it didn't come off. In the end, it was really those marauders camping on the objective that gave me the chance to pull off a draw in a game which was often running against me. Usually most battles of Warhammer Fantasy have some random elements in them. It wouldn't be very interesting if there weren't, after all we're not here to play fantasy chess, but this one had an absolute ton of them in, and really very little worked out the way either of us could have expected. I wouldn't want every game to be quite as crazy as this, but boy was it a blast. Now, Drew has only been playing for 1 year, and while he's very modest about his generalship abilities, I think he's shaping up to be a seriously good player, and I fully expect him to do very well from here on in. Maybe in a universe far, far away, there'll be 2 Bretonnian armies jousting it out on the top table for the crown of a tournament. Well, we can dream. Well, my, what a dramatic game, and I think I need a whiskey and soda and a cigar after that. Anyway, safe journey home, and see you next time for more Warhammer. Cheerio.